my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria and today's video is just going to be my best books of 2024. I was trying to aim for 24 books of 2024 and I think I'm just shy of it, but some of these are part of series and duologies and things like that, so technically it will add up to probably more than 24 if you count all of the series, because most of these are just representatives of the series that I read. But yeah, basically just going to be going through all of the books that I would probably say were my favourites of this year. I'm not going to be ranking them in any way because I just can't. I'm too indecisive. I cannot decide which book was better than the other, and yeah, I just can't commit to something like that. But I have tried to split them into certain categories, so I do have some romance and more contemporary books, and I do have some what I would call more fantasy led, so maybe some high fantasy or sci-fi or something like that, and then I do have my romantasy reads as well, so they might not be necessarily romantasy categorized in terms of however they do be categorized these days, but these are the ones that I would say are more romance leaning or more romance forward, or if you do like romance, there's a good amount of romance in there to keep you entertained as well. So yeah, just gonna go through all the books, give you my thoughts and feelings, tell you why they were my favourites, and without further ado, let's just get into the list. Okay, so first up I think I'm actually going to go through the romance favourites of this year, because I don't really talk about romance that often because quite honestly contemporary romance isn't a genre that I reach for a lot. It usually is a bit of a palate cleanser for me in between my other reads, and not because I don't enjoy it, it's just not the genre I gravitate to for whatever reason. But this year I decided to make an effort to try and read a lot more romance in the summer months, because there were quite a few series and quite a few books that I was kind of really interested in, knew they were books that I would enjoy, but was always pushing them aside for some of my fantasy reads. So I made a real effort in the summer to try and pick up some of those romance reads. So the first one I ended up picking up was Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now obviously Emily Henry is huge in the literary / romance world. She's probably one of the most celebrated authors on that side of things, and I'd read one or two of her books before, really enjoyed them. Did like the writing style, but they were maybe not 5-star or anything like that for me, so wasn't too sure what I was going to think about this one, but I'm really glad I did pick this one up because I ended up rating this one 5 stars I think. And in this one we're following Harriet and Wynne, who have recently separated. They were married but they're kind of leading separate lives at the moment, but they have a group of friends who every year they go on holiday with to one of their friends' cabins, and they haven't told the friend group yet that they have broken up. So they decide to go together and pretend to still be together on this holiday so that their friends can have one last holiday with everyone together before they tell everybody that they are breaking up and getting a divorce. And we're just following them as they kind of navigate through their feelings on this, on why they've ended up breaking up. You do get some flashbacks to when they met and to now, and kind of just seeing how their relationship ended up dwindling, and you know, there's a lot of miscommunication in here and things like that, but I do think that she done it in a great way, in a very realistic way. And there was actually a lot of themes in here just about kind of self-worth, self-discovery, and kind of just being happy in yourself and not just being happy within your relationship and with your person, I suppose. And I really enjoyed this. It did actually make me tear up at times as well, because I think the main character Harriet, even though she is insufferable for some of it, I could relate to her on quite a few levels. So really enjoyed this one. Really great summer read. You could probably read it anytime really, but for me it was really good to read in the summer, and so far of the Emily Henrys that I've read, I'd say this is probably one of my favourites. Next up is another kind of booktube, BookTok darling, and that's Ashley Poston, and I had read from her before, so I'd read The Dead Romantics and really enjoyed it, so decided to give the 7 Year Slip a try because I'd heard a lot of people really loving it, really raving about it, and again I think I ended up giving this one 5 stars. In this one we follow Clementine, who has just inherited an apartment from her aunt. Her aunt had always said it was magical and there was magic within the apartment, but she never really took any notice of that until one day she comes home to the apartment to find a strange man standing within her kitchen, and he's absolutely perfect except for one thing, that he's 7 years in the past. And this one again is mostly a romance, but there were a lot of different themes in here just about kind of grief, sadness, how you kind of deal with loss, and again just being really happy within yourself before you're kind of looking for that happiness within someone else. And again it was just a really heartwarming read, a really good break from some of those fantasy reads I have, and yeah, just thoroughly enjoyed it. I really like Ashley Poston's writing. I did read a novel Love Story this year and unfortunately it didn't quite hit as good as this and The Dead Romantics, but overall I'd still say her writing's really good, so basically any of her books that she has out at the moment I'd highly recommend. Next up we've got Keeping 13, and this is actually part of the series of The Boys of Tommen. So Finding 13 is the first book. This is by Chloe Walsh. So I'd seen this series going around for ages, basically people really raving about it, saying that it was one of the best reads they had, and I had kind of heard it being described as a sports romance, which isn't really my thing. It's not something I gravitate towards, not something I don't like because quite honestly I haven't read any, so I'm not sure if it's a genre I would like or not, but it kind of held me off from starting this for quite a long time because I thought it was just a sports romance, and these are pretty chunky, so I was kind of thinking what could there be to say within that amount of pages for a sports romance. But in this one we follow Shannon and Johnny. So Shannon kind of comes from her side of the tracks and has had a bit of a hard start in life in terms of her schooling, and she's been bullied in her school. She ends up moving to Thomond College where she meets Johnny, who is kind of the star rugby player, really popular, everyone likes him, and we kind of just watch their relationship blossom from friendship into something maybe a bit more. And I would definitely say that the description of this as a sports romance probably isn't really that accurate because of some of the themes that we explore in here. You're not going to get anything light and fluffy within this, so again, just be warned with this one, there are going to be some trigger warnings. So for domestic abuse, sexual abuse, child neglect and things like that, it was a lot heavier than I was expecting it to be, and especially the second book, so Keeping 13. The ending of Binding 13 was just absolutely crazy, and I moved on to this one quite swiftly because I wanted to see what happened. And I think with this one, it really was the characters that really drew me in, really made me love this series. I love the characters that she has written in here. They did feel very real. They're kind of supposed to be teenagers from Ireland, and they're supposed to be from around 2006, 2007, and that's when I was around their age. So I don't know if it was just nostalgic for me, but they definitely did give me that same vibe and really brought me back to that time and being their age. But yeah, it was a rocky start with the first book, and that's why I'm not talking about that one in particular, because I wasn't too sure with that one. I think I rated that maybe 3.5 to 4 stars, but when I read this one I was definitely a lot more invested, really loved the characters, and I think I rated this one 4 or 4.5 or something like that. But overall I would just say that the series that I've read so far is definitely worth picking up, even if you're not usually into a sports romance or reading books about younger characters. I do think that there's quite a lot in here that will still keep you intrigued and still keep you entertained, is the wrong word considering what goes on in these books, but there's definitely a lot to unpack in here, and yeah, it's just one of my top reads of the year so far. Next up we have Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, and again this is one that I had heard quite a few people talking about, and especially this author. I believe she has quite a few books out at the moment, but this one really piqued my interest because I'd heard it had disability representation and that the author herself actually has the disability that is represented within this book, so that immediately piqued my interest because I don't think we have enough of that within literature, and I just wanted to see how it was done and kind of read this one. It does have a trope that I would normally say isn't my favourite, so it's not a spoiler to say it. It's kind of the premise of the whole book that there is accidental pregnancy trope within here, but I would say even if that's a trope you normally don't like, still give this one a go because it was really heartwarming, really fun to read. I really love the characters in here as well. I think the banter between all of the characters was really good. We're following Wynne, who's quite strong-headed and has obviously lived with a disability for her entire life, and it's kind of felt she has to prove herself that she can do things on her own. And when this happens, obviously she starts to question that, she starts to worry that she will fail, that she might not be as successful at this as she has been in other things in life, and we kind of watch her and Beau, who is the MMC within this book, go through that journey. And for me, again, it was just a really heartwarming read. I read it within one sitting, you know, I kind of read it on a plane journey home from holiday, and it just had me smiling from ear to ear the whole way through. I just really love the way it was done. Even though there are quite a few tropes in here, I think they were done really well. I don't think there was too much of the miscommunication just for the sake of it thrown in here. I just really loved the way they navigated it, and I think it was just a really good representation of a healthy relationship and how something like this should be approached. So yeah, really loved this. I definitely want to read some more of her books because I really loved the writing in here, really loved the characters, and I think her book Out in the Woods comes out in January, which is based on a couple of characters who were in here, so I have the arc for that, so I'm going to be reading that really soon. But yeah, just another romance that I really enjoyed this year. And then next up we've got Love and Other Words by Christina Lauren. So this is the only book I've read by these authors, and again this is one that I just heard a lot of hype about. Most people I watch who have read it say that it's 5 stars, so I was just really intrigued to pick this one up and see what it's all about, and I wanted to read from these authors, and I thought where better to start than kind of what everyone would hail as one of their best books. So in this one we follow Macy, who meets Elliot at quite a young age at her summer home. So basically we follow the story of them meeting each other each summer, then building a friendship and connecting through books and through writing and reading, and it's really wholesome and really sweet how they build that relationship. Basically something happens and they end up not speaking for around 10 or 11 years until one day they bump into each other, and it just kind of brings up all those memories and makes them both face their past. And again, this is one I read within a day. I probably could have read it within one sitting if I had the time to, but this one really got to me. It really got to my feels. I'm not the type of person to really cry quite easily for books, and this one for some reason just really tugged at my heartstrings, and I don't don't know if it's just the way it was written or the circumstances within here, but I really enjoyed it. And I haven't read anything else by Christina Lauren, but just going by the writing in here, I'll definitely want to pick up something by them again. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about these 4 as a set. They are 4 out of a 5-book series, but the last book in this didn't really do it for me. But this is the Chestnut Spring series, so again, this is probably one that you've heard of. And if you'd asked me at the start of the year, was cowboy romance or kind of the ranch romance something that I would enjoy, I probably would have guessed no, but I ended up flying through these. I think I read all 5 of them within like 6 or 7 days or something like that. Really loved them. The last one, not so much, but the first 4 definitely loved, especially Reckless and Heartless, so the 2nd and the 4th book. So as I say, they're kind of cowboy, small town, ranch romances, and the first one follows Summer and Rhett. Rhett is a bull rider and he's kind of got a bad image within the press recently, and Summer is sent to kind of clean up his act. His agent is her father and he asked her to go and almost be like a babysitter to give him some guidance and to try and make his reputation a bit better. That's where the story starts. You can probably guess where things go from there, but the rest of the series just kind of follows some of their friends and Rat's brothers and kind of their love interests, and I just really loved these. I think if you're looking for a palate cleanser, looking for something that's going to be a really fun read but also have a bit of depth to it and just really fun characters, definitely look into this. As I say, this is not a series I thought I would have put in my favourites at the start of the year, but really glad I gave them a chance and proved myself wrong because I really did enjoy these. Okay, so next up I'll jump into my more romance leaning fantasy reads, and one of the first ones I want to talk about is Wisteria by Adeline Grace. So this just came out this year, I believe. So I read Foxglove earlier in the year as well, but I think Wisteria is my favourite within this series. So this is part of the Belladonna series. So the first book we follow Signa, who was orphaned as a young child and has basically been passed from family member to take care of her, but has been quite mistreated by them, as the only reason they took her in was to try and get their hands on her inheritance money. Now, the thing with Signa is that death basically follows her and all of these family members end up dying. So she ends up with the last of her family members in the first book, and the story kind of goes from there. And the first book kind of follows a bit of a murder mystery. We're following Signa as she tries to work this out. Death is a character within the series and he's kind of helping her and guiding her through it. And then we follow some of the side characters, so I can't really give you too much about what this is about without spoiling some of the components of the first books, but just to say that I really love this. I think this is my favourite in the series. It's a very dark and gothic romantasy, but also has a whimsical side as well. So I would say if you like anything that's kind of set in almost like a Regency era or historical fantasy, you probably will enjoy this. If you think Bridgerton but give it a gothic vibe and throw in a bit of a murder mystery in there, that's probably what you get with this series. And yeah, really love this 3rd book and it's probably my favourite in the series. Next up we've got When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, and this one is definitely more on the flowery side. So if you like purple prose and very flowery writing, you'll probably enjoy this one. I do think that most people who read it did enjoy it, even if they don't enjoy that side of writing, but it's a pretty long book, and if that's not a writing style you enjoy, you may find this one a little bit jarring. But in this one we're following Rave, who is basically an assassin for a rebellion guild within this world, and at the start of the book she ends up getting caught by the Guild of Nobles, who are basically a powerful Fae group who the rebellion are rebelling against. While she is imprisoned, the Fae group end up getting overturned by a man called Khan Fagor, and he offers her a deal to get her out of the prison if they work together, and essentially the story goes from there. This one does get a little meandering at times. There's definitely a lot of confusion within the first, I would say 50%. You don't really know what's going on in the story. There's dragon lore within here. I think there's a glossary that's like 20 pages or something like that within this book, so there's a lot of world building, a lot of lore, but for me that just really added to the richness of this book. But I would say if you're new to the romantasy genre, maybe don't pick this one up as your first read because it does get a little bit convoluted, it does get a little bit confusing, and as I say, the writing is incredibly flowery. It may be a little bit jarring as a first read, but if you like that type of thing, definitely read this one. I really loved it and can't wait for the next book. Next up is Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. So I read Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor last year, read that duology. It's god tier for me. That series is always going to be god tier. I think about it every day. It's my Roman Empire. Absolutely loved the writing in it, so I thought it was only right that I read her other series, Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which I believe came out before Strange the Dreamer, but wanted to pick this up just because, as I say, her writing in Strange the Dreamer was so beautiful. I wanted to get that experience again with another series, and I definitely think that I did. It may not be quite as good as Strange the Dreamer for me personally, but it's still a 5-star series for me and definitely one I would recommend checking out. So this one starts out as a bit of an urban fantasy. So we're following Karu, who is a 17-year-old art student in Prague, and she's been working for these chimera who are basically able to grant wishes at the cost of teeth. So Karu is helping them to kind of of collect the teeth for these wishes. She doesn't quite know what the teeth are used for or why that's the price, but she's been doing this for her entire life because these chimera have basically been like her parents for her entire life. Corey doesn't really know where she came from, why these chimera are kind of her guardians, but one day she stumbles across Akiva, who is a seraphim, basically an archangel, who kind of shatters her world point of view, and she maybe starts to learn things about herself that she didn't know before. And I really loved this one. If you like urban fantasy, you'll like this, but there is kind of a dual element with this as you go on in the story. I think if you liked Crescent City, you may like this as well, because obviously we do have the chimera, we have the archangels, we have a badass FMC, we have found family elements, and yeah, again, the writing in here is just beautiful. It's not quite as flowery as Strange the Dreamer, so if you're not too into purple prose, you won't find that as much in here. It's definitely much more approachable. And there's 3 books within the series. I loved each and every one of them, so definitely if you haven't read Laini Taylor yet, you could potentially start with this trilogy, as this was published first, and I believe if you read this and then read Strange the Dreamer, you'll probably notice some Easter eggs from this story. They're not connected, but I think there are some little nods to this series within that duology as well, so I'll be excited to reread Strange the Dreamer so that I can see if I notice them. But yeah, highly recommend this series and basically anything by Laini Taylor. And then speaking of authors that can basically do no wrong for me, the next series and book that I want to talk about is Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare, and this is the first book in the Dark Artifices trilogy. So this is part of the bigger Shadowhunter series, so this is book 10 or something like that within the bigger world, in the reading order that I used anyway. And up until this point, I think my favourite trilogy had been The Infernal Devices, and that still is probably my favourite trilogy within the wider world, but this is a close second at the minute. This is definitely a close second. I'm still reading The Last Hours, so that may override this one, but I really love this one. It's definitely a trilogy for anyone who loves forbidden love, yearning, angst. This is a YA series, so there's not much spice in here or anything like that, if that's what you look for within your books, but I would say that all of the tension and the yearning and the angst that these characters go through is more than satisfying for anyone reading it. So definitely amazing series, amazing characters. I think Cassandra Clare's character work is just elite. I absolutely love the characters that she built, the family that she builds, and can't recommend the Shadowhunter series enough. And it seems we're getting all the favourite authors here, so my next book that I want to talk about is Air by Saba Tahir. So again, An Ember in the Ashes is a series that she wrote previously, and it's god tier for me. Absolutely adore that series. If you haven't read it, definitely read it. And the reason to read it is so that you can read this book. So I've seen a few people jump into this one before they read An Ember in the Ashes, and while you technically can, I would highly recommend that you don't. I would highly recommend that you read that quartet first and then jump in the air. So basically this book follows the children of some of the people within that series, and it's set 20 years after the end of that. So if you were going to read that series, the start of this will kind of spoil the ending of that one. So while you can read it, I would definitely say you should jump into that series first. But to give you a brief overview of this one, it basically says an orphan, an outcast, a prince, and a killer who will bring an empire to its knees. And essentially we're following these 4 characters on their disparate journeys, and they end up converging in terms of the storylines. But as always with Saba Tahir, it's just really heart-wrenching. You don't know who to trust. You cannot trust anything that you would think. She doesn't follow kind of formulaic storylines or anything like that. And I always say with Saba Tahir, just don't get too attached to any of your characters. You never know what's going to happen to them. She's pretty savage. But I think if you do like a romantasy that has a bit more of a political backdrop, a bit more of a action-packed plot, with romance still being kind of in the forefront there, Saba Tahir is definitely an author you need to look into, because as I say, An Ember in the Ashes is absolutely elite to me. That first series follows Leia, who is a scholar within that world. The scholars are kind of ruled by what are called the militants, and Leia ends up going into the military school to try and save her brother who was arrested as part of the rebellion. There she meets Elias, who is training to become what is called a mask within this world, and their storylines converge. Again, it's kind of reluctant allyship, and the story really goes from there. But for me, Saba Tahir's writing is absolutely stunning. You'll fall in love with her characters, you'll fall in love with her world, and yeah, definitely just read An Ember in the Ashes, because that means you'll be able to read this book, which was one of my favourites of the whole year. So next up I've got the Kindred Saga by Penn Cole. So obviously this is Spark of the Everflame. Not sure which book in this was my favourite, maybe the third one, which I think is Heat of the Everflame. I'm not sure, I'm still undecided, but basically I'm just categorising it as the whole series. So this was indie published when I first picked it up, which is why I have the indie copy. It has now been traditionally published, so I believe you can pick this up in hardback now. But in this one we follow DM, who is living in this land of mortals that was essentially colonised by the gods and is ruled by the gods' descendants, who are essentially like the royal within this land. At the start of this book, DM is trying to uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance 6 months ago. Her mother was a healer for the royal descendants, and in order to try and uncover the mystery, she ends up taking her mother's place within the palace and becoming a royal healer. There she meets Luther. He is the dying king's mysterious heir, and obviously they are technically enemies within this world. She is immortal, he is a descendant, and a lot of DM's friends are actually involved in this rebellion going up against the descendants, so we're kind of watching her battle with her decision of which side of that rebellion she wants to be on. And I just really love this. I do think that yes, it was a little bit slow in setting up what is essentially going to be the romance within here, but this first book really does set up the world, sets up the politics of this land, and sets up the plot. And for me, I didn't mind it being a little bit slow at the start because I do think that it added to the richness of the story, and I've really loved the trilogy that's out so far. There is another book that will be hopefully coming out in 2025 called Burn of the Everflame, which will be the conclusion, but the way that the third book ended off is absolutely painful, so I cannot wait to read the fourth book. Then last up for the romantasy reads, I would say it's A Court This Cruel and Lovely by Stasia Stark, and this is one that I've seen a lot of buzz about on bookstagram and BookTok when it was coming out, but I haven't seen a lot of people actually read it and rate it and kind of give their thoughts on it. So this one we follow Priska, who lives in this world where essentially when you're born, if you do have magical powers, they will be taken from you and given to the king as part of a way to protect the world from the evil fae. However, your powers will be given back to you after you're 21, but in order to get them you will be tested to ensure that you gave up the powers that you had when you were a child. If you're found to have magical powers when you're tested, you will be arrested and inevitably killed. Priska is one of those people who for some reason still has some powers, so she ends up fleeing in order to protect her town and to protect her family, and along the way she bumps into some mercenaries who begrudgingly help her, and they kind of make an agreement to ally with one another, and the story kind of goes from there. Obviously one of the mercenaries may end up being of special interest to Priska, but I just really enjoyed this. I do think that it was a little bit formulaic when it comes to romantasy. You know, there were a few things that I could predict along the way, but I really loved the writing, I really loved the characters, I really loved the story. I think it was definitely unique enough for me to remain interested and intrigued. There's 4 books within the series and I read all 4 this year. Really enjoyed the side characters. I might have liked a little bit more from the side characters than just in the last book, but maybe there's going to be an opening there for her to continue with those characters in kind of a spin-off series or something like that. But yeah, I think if you like romantasy, or if you're new to the romantasy genre, this is definitely one I would recommend because it's very approachable, very easy to read, very fun to read, pretty fast paced for the most part, and yeah, just a really entertaining series overall. So now I'm going to move into more of what I would say is the more fantasy leaning, and there is one sci-fi in here as well. If you watch on my videos you probably know which one that is, but these are kind of more of the pure fantasy. There will be some romance in these as well because most of the books I read do have romance in them, but I'd say these are more focused on the fantasy plot with the romance being a definite subplot in them. The first one I want to talk about is a book that I'm actually still reading, so a little bit unfair perhaps, but I do only have about 10% left and I've really loved it, really loved the writing. So it's Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong, and this one I believe is hailed as a bit of, it's almost like a dark academic fantasy, but essentially we're following Siona, who is the first female mage to be led into this magical university of magics and industry, and within this land they are the people who kind of keep the town running. They help to power the town and basically keep it thriving. So previously there had been no female admittance to this university, but Siona ends up getting admitted, and when she gets there she obviously doesn't get a very warm welcome. A lot of her colleagues are kind of teasing her and belittling her, and as part of that they end up assigning a janitor to be her assistant. Now what they don't know is that will probably be one of the worst decisions they make because he has a bit of a past and some secrets to his past, and he may end up being quite a formidable partner for her, and the story really does open up from there. I just think with this one it's been really well written in terms of the mystery within here. There's a few things that I have predicted along the way, but I've really loved the writing style. I've really loved the character arc in here. It does have quite a few dark themes in here as well, so definitely just check out some trigger warnings for this one, I would say, in terms of suicide and mental health and things like that. There's definitely a few touches in here on that, but overall I just really loved this, really loved the characters, really loved the story. It felt pretty unique to me, the way the magic system works in here, and I can't wait to check out The Sword of Kaigan, which is another book that she has written. I believe it's still indie published, but this one had been previously indie published and was picked up by traditional publishing, but I have actually recently ordered The Sword of Kaigan as it's one that's been on my TBR for quite some time in terms of wanting to read it, and after reading this I definitely am intrigued by that even more and cannot wait to pick it up. But yeah, I know I haven't finished it yet, so maybe I shouldn't be adding it on this list, but pretty sure this is going to be a pretty highly rated book for me and will be one of of my favourites that I've read this year. Next up we've got Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and this is by Heather Fawcett, and I wasn't too sure where to place this one. This isn't really romantasy because the romance is a subplot, but it's not really within the same category as the rest of these books, I don't think, or it may just be that it's a bit more cosy than the rest of the books that I have on here. But either way, this was definitely one of my favourite reads of the year, this and the second book. I'd say I preferred the first book over the second book, but overall I just really enjoyed the story. So in this one we're following Emily, who is basically putting together an encyclopedia of fairies, and to do that she ends up travelling to Arctic Norway to try and discover a bit more about the fairies that are called the hidden ones, as they don't have a lot of research in that where she is from. And the thing with Emily is that she's not really the most personable person. She's quite standoffish, she can be quite blunt, she doesn't really like to feed into small talk or anything like that, so building relationships can be difficult for her. So her reception when she gets there isn't the warmest, until her colleague Wendell Bumblebee turns up to try and help her with this research project, and he is the complete opposite of Emily. He's very personable, very extroverted, all the townsfolk love him, so it causes quite a fun rift between the two. And the way that this is written is in diary entries from Emily, so her just putting in kind of her notes from the day as she's building them up. And this was just, as I say, really cozy, a bit like a warm hug of a book. I really enjoyed kind of the traditional look at fairies and kind of that more traditional representation of them, kind of more akin to the folklore I would have heard as a child, and I think that's part of the reason I just really love this. It is a bit of a different view on that fairy side of things than we traditionally get with a lot of these books these days. And yeah, it was just a really cozy, fun read. I loved the kind of romance in here. It was a bit more of a quiet romance, it wasn't in your face or anything, but it's definitely one that had a lot of impact, so highly recommend this one, especially in the winter season. This is a really great read for the winter time. Next up I'm going to group these two together because they are by the same author, and that's Empire of the Vampire and Nevernight by J. Kristoff. So I've read both of these series this year and really ended up enjoying J. Kristoff's writing. I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy his writing, if it was going to be for me, but I'm glad to say I did end up really enjoying both of these. So Nevernight follows our main protagonist Mia Corvere, who is basically on a journey for vengeance. She witnesses her father's execution at quite a young age, and the story is kind of following her seeking vengeance on the people who've done that. And this one I just really loved the characters. I did love the world that was built here. I thought it was really rich and dense and really well thought out. I think there was plenty of twists and turns in here. I couldn't guess what was going to happen. Another author who you just cannot trust with your favourite characters. And yeah, I think if you're looking to get into high fantasy and you want something that's maybe a bit more approachable, I think for me personally I am trying to read a bit more high fantasy next year, and a few of the books that I've tried this year have been kind of the Brandon Sanderson books and J. Kristoff as well. And I would say even though I was quite intimidated by these definitely are very approachable. There's a lot of light banter in here to kind of take you away from the doom and gloom of the main story, so definitely don't be intimidated by them, especially Nevernight, as the books are pretty short. They're not too difficult to get through. I would say the audiobooks were pretty good for these ones as well, so if you want to try and do a bit of immersive reading in here, I would definitely recommend that as well. But really enjoyed this series, as well as the two books that are out in the Empire of the Vampire series, so Empire of the Vampire and Empire of the Damned. Out of the two I'm not too sure which one I preferred more in terms of the story. I may have preferred the first book, but to be honest they're probably on par with each other. And in this one we're following Gabrielle de Leon, who's the last remaining Silver Saint within this land, who are basically vampires who swear to protect humans from other vampires, other demons and things like that. And essentially the way the story is told is through interview, and Gabriel has been caught by his enemies and he's basically telling the story of how he got there. So I believe it's supposed to be similar to Interview with a Vampire. I've never read that book, I've watched the movie but I've never read the book, so I can't really talk about how similar it is, but it's supposedly written in quite a similar style. And again, this one, just really loved the characters, really loved the world. I think it was really rich and dense, and again kept me guessing the entire way through. The way that the second book has ended again is painful, so highly anticipating the third book in that series coming out next year. And I've only just noticed, and it's probably very intentional, but one of the books, Nevernight, is basically a book where the sun never sets, and Empire of the Vampire is a series where the sun never rises, and I can't believe it's taken me this long to realise that. Next up, in terms of wanting to explore a bit more high fantasy, The Poppy War is a book that had been on my radar for quite some time. I had heard that it was quite harrowing and dark, so I had put it off for a while, but after reading R.F. Kuang's Babel, I really just wanted to pick this one up to read it because I loved her writing in there, loved how she made me kind of think and really get out of my comfort zone in terms of the way that I think, so I wanted to pick this up just to see if I enjoyed her writing as much within this one. And I would say enjoy is probably the wrong word, because this series is, it's really heartbreaking, it's really harrowing. I think it really shows quite a gritty representation of what war is like, and I really think that it's a very important series for anyone to read, and especially at this time it does really kind of make you reflect on things that are going on in the world, things that we maybe don't understand about how war works, and questioning our morality, you know, no matter what side you're on. one, but the story kind of follows our main protagonist, Rin, who is living with her aunt and uncle. She's been orphaned and she was quite young and they really mistreat her. They're basically trying to marry her off so that they can get her off their hands, and at the start of the story she makes a deal with them that if she can get into this military school called Synagogue, that they will allow her to do so and break off the marriage. She manages to get in and we kind of follow her journey within that training school, and she's quite mistreated because she has darker skin, and we kind of see where the cultural and racial biases are already apparent within this world. And then obviously there is a war that breaks out. It is based on a real Japanese war that happened, and yeah, as I say, it's just very visceral, very graphic. Definitely look up trigger warnings for this one, for basically every type of trigger warning you can look up. There's quite a lot in here, but as I say, I definitely still recommend it. I think the way that it's written is beautiful. There is some kind of comic relief in here as well. The characters are really endearing in here at times, and you do end up really rooting for them. Even when they're doing things that you might not necessarily agree with, you will end up rooting for them within this. And I still have the third book to read. Hopefully going to be reading that at the start of next year, but so far it's been a 5-star series for me. I've loved the books that I've read so far, and yeah, really excited to finish out the trilogy. And then next up is again me stepping out of my comfort zone. It is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and this one is much more of a sci-fi led story, which again I would have said is not for me. It's not really something that I lean towards, especially if it's something set in space and planets and aliens or anything like that. It's generally not something I would lean towards, but this one has always kind of piqued my interest. I've always been interested. I love the cover, I love the tagline, and I'd heard a lot of people just saying it was really, really good. So in this one we follow Gideon, who is living on the 9th house, which is basically a planet within this world. There are 9 planets and she is living on the 9th one. She was orphaned as quite a young child and has been brought up by nuns and skeletons within this planet, but has been unhappy basically all of her life and has been trying to flee. Now, one of her flee attempts gets ambushed by the heir of the 9th house, who Gideon has basically had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with her entire life. So the heir is called Harrow, and Harrow is a necromancer, as are all of the heirs of the 9 planets. And essentially there are going to be some trials for all of the heirs of the planets to come to the first planet and participate in some trials to become a lictor for the emperor. And basically what that means is they will become immortal and be given all of this power. So Harrow wants Gideon to basically come with her as a cavalier, and she says if she does this for her, she will allow her to flee afterwards. So the story kind of goes from there. I would say that this does get a little bit convoluted and confusing at times, but when you're reading it you do feel kind of in the story. So within the scenes and within the narrative, you're not kind of thinking what the hell's going on here. You are very present and you will understand what is going on, but the bigger picture can be a little bit confusing until you get later in the book and until the end. But this one was just such a fun read. I really, really loved the way that it was told. I loved the narrative. I loved the banter between the characters. Gideon was amazing as a FMC. Really loved Harrow as well. Very snarky, very opinionated, but also had a bit of a heart of gold as well. So I kind of loved that juxtaposition within her character, and all of the side characters I felt were really well developed and really well fleshed out, and the world was really rich, the plot was really rich, and yeah, just absolutely loved this. Very, very pleasantly surprised with how much I loved it. Absolutely 5 stars, and I can't wait to read Harrow, which is the second book within this series. This is your sign to jump out of that comfort zone, because this could be a contender for my best book of the year. I'm not going to commit to it, but yeah, it's definitely very high up there. And then speaking of books that are probably very high contenders for my favourite books of the year, it would be The Star of the Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and this one I actually read in January. One of the first books I read this year, and again it's one that had been on my TBR for quite some time. Heard amazing things about it, so really wanted to pick it up and give it a try, especially as I had seen that anyone who loves Strange the Dreamer would probably love this as well, so I thought this would be the perfect book to start out my year with, and very glad to say I absolutely loved this. The writing style, the plot, the characters, loved everything about it. So we're following Zachary Rollins, who within the university library finds a book that has a story from his life within there, and essentially that sets him on a quest to figure out where this book came from, how a story from his life got in there, and why it's in the library and how he managed to find it. Along the way he finds a secret club within New York, a hidden labyrinth underground, and it kind of leads him to all of these different paths. Again, this one can be a little bit confusing and convoluted at times, but definitely just trust the process with this one, because by the end it kind of all makes sense and it all clicks into place. We do also get some snippets from stories from the book that Zachary picked up, so they are kind of interwoven within the narrative here. I really loved how they came together with the main narrative as well, and I do think that it ended in quite an ambiguous way where you can kind of interpret it in different ways, but I would love to reread this one one and kind of go over my thoughts again with it, just to see if I interpret things slightly differently or if I pick up on anything slightly differently, because I know where the narrative goes. But yeah, as I say, if I was really hard pushed to say which book was my favourite, it would be a toss up between this and Gideon the Ninth, because I just think those are books that are going to stick with me. While the rest of them have all definitely been favourites, they're definitely all very high up there in some of my favourites of all time. I think Starless Sea and Gideon the Ninth are two books that made such an impression on me that if I was asked, they would probably be my top two. Okay, so that's everything. As I say, I'm not too sure if that is 24 books. I'm sure it was just over 24 books when you count in the books from the series, but it was in and around that number anyway. Let me know if any of these books were on your favourites, if you've read any of them, if they're on your TBR. I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and feelings on them, and if they're ones that you're going to be picking up next year. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so book recommendation videos, reading vlogs, book shopping, book hauls, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!